Um, Once again, thanks for joining me. And here we go. Perhaps. All right. I'm part of the National Great Rivers Research and Education Center at NGRREC. We're a river research and education center, just like our name says. Our mission is studying the ecology of large floodplain rivers, the watersheds that feed them, and the ties to the communities that use them. If you really boil that down, we are a river sustainability organization. That's really what we're all about, and I'll talk a little bit about why that is, and sort of other parts and pieces of our mission and vision, and why we undertake this. So NGRREC was founded in 2003 as a partnership of Lewis and Clark Community College, the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and the Illinois Natural History Survey, which at this point.
You muted yourself.
How did I mute myself?
It was me trying to let someone in the waiting room. I'm so sorry, Ted.
Hey, I can take a hint. We can be done.
You're off.
No, founded as a partnership of Lewis and Clark, the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and the Illinois Natural History Survey. The partnership has evolved over the years, and we function as a unit of Lewis and Clark Community College here in Godfrey, with our field station in East Alton. And these three partners brought a lot of different strengths to the table. Lewis and Clark brings that real community focus and a nimbleness to the organization. U of I, the large research large research organization, and Illinois Natural History Survey, very focused research organization on the natural resources of the state of Illinois. Let's see. So yeah, our Confluence field station located in East Alton. You see in that upper left picture, that's sort of our aerial photo. It's our home base for NGRREC. This middle photo, in the top middle and bottom middle, you can see our aquatic mesocosms. Those are a really good experimental tool for us that allow us to do some work on simulating river conditions. And then we kind of do some other, some lab research, outreach, field research. It really runs the gamut. I won't get into all of that yet, but we'll hopefully get there in the presentation. So what I want to talk about today is really why we're here. Why are we studying great rivers? Why are they important? And why is it here that we choose to do it? And just a few things here. Rivers are more than just water. When you think of a river, really, I think of a body of water, but it's much more than that. When NGRREC thinks of a river, we try really hard to think of the river as a watershed. And this concept, and I have a slide. The next slide has an image of the watershed, but you can think of a watershed as a piece of land where if you were to put a drop of water on that land, eventually that drop of water will all flow through one single point. So our Mississippi River watershed is expansive. I'll show an illustration of that. And there's so much that goes on in that watershed that affects what actually happens in what we traditionally would think of as the river, as our body of water. The river itself, we study it because it's a great economic engine for our local region, for the heartland of the United States, and rivers across the world are economic engines. We study it because it's a greatly altered resource. Humans have relied on rivers for so long. that we have altered them in many ways. And in order to sustain those rivers, because they're so altered, we need to understand how we've altered them. And it's rivers such as the Mississippi at this point are highly managed systems. So we have to have a good understanding of those systems and how we've altered them to be able to manage them sustainably. And interesting thing about rivers, and it's sort of tied to the economic engine part, but human civilization really is completely tied to rivers, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I find rivers really cool for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons I think they're so cool is they really represent the integration of fresh water across landscapes. And so when you get to the mouth of the river where it pours into whatever its terminus is, it really reflects the cumulative impacts of natural and anthropogenic processes across the watershed. And I say anthropogenic, so the word anthropogenic means human affected or human, so human affected processes. So you can, rivers at their terminus, at their mouth, you can see signals of what's happening all across that watershed. And this is a really nice little illustration of a watershed. So rainfalls anywhere on this piece of land here, it's going to end up in the river. It's assuming it doesn't go into groundwater or something like that or evaporate. But surface water, should it remain on the surface, they'll all mix and mingle and end up together here at the mouth of the river. And for us, of course, in the Mississippi River, that is the Gulf of Mexico. So, great rivers. What makes a river great? And there are a few things here, and why we study these great rivers. But what makes a river great? And a few things. I'll go through each one individually. I think they're pretty interesting. Size makes a river great. A richness of species in the river makes a river great. The ability to preserve ancient lineages of species or have preserved ancient lineages of species. Biological productivity makes a river great, and usefulness to humans makes a river great. So, let's see. Okay, we're going to go on to the next one. Size. Mississippi River is the 48th longest river in the world at about 2,300 miles. The Mississippi was named, it's a indigenous name from the Ojibwe people, means the father of waters. And that kind of tells you a little bit about its importance. There were some other indigenous people throughout history who called it different names, but this is the one that stuck in our modern time. And I have here on this slide, actually the fourth longest at 3,800 miles. Modern geography is sort of an anomaly in that through really any objective measure or objective look at the river, truly the Mississippi River actually would be the Missouri River. So Missouri and Mississippi. So when you include those two, and you'll see it on the next slide here, it's really the third or fourth, depending on your source, longest river in the world. And I'll just go to that. So you can see here on this slide, this is the Mississippi River watershed. Parts of 31 states, 2 Canadian provinces. You can be in the state of New York, and a rainstorm there, the rain will end up down the Gulf of Mexico. Same thing with Montana. My Canadian geography isn't very good, but I think Alberta and Saskatchewan are up here. So that river or that water will end up down here. But as you're looking at this, the Mississippi River, 2,300 miles, the headwaters are in in and around Lake Itasca, Minnesota. That's a pretty cool spot. But, through, like I said, most objective measures, the Missouri River really is the main part of the river here. But it's just a funny artifact of human history, North American history, that we're calling it the Mississippi River. It was completely unexplored by settlers for quite some time. But going back here, so it's the 7th largest flow of any river in the world, the 3rd largest basin or watershed of any river in the world, and 31 states, 2 provinces, but that represents 41% of the continental United States, which is just kind of astounding for a watershed, I think. It takes about 90 days for water to flow from Lake Itasca, its headwaters in Minnesota, to the Gulf. And it's on average, so that's a speed of about 2 meters per second or so. No, I'm sorry, that's not right. But what is it? Oh, this is bad. I'm getting my units all messed up. I want to say it can be 2 miles per hour. Somebody help me out. Miles, do you know? I can see you.
I think it's probably closer to like 1 meter per minute instead of second on that range.
This is embarrassing. Wait, can we make this a podcast? Miles, can you be my fact checker?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry. Perfect. Well, chime back in when you find it. Thanks. So here we are, Mississippi River Watershed once again. And then this, let's see if this animation works. But this is sort of an animation that shows you how water reaches the Gulf, like when it would have to fall on land to reach the Gulf. I'm going to show it here again. So it's just a pretty interesting illustration of all the tributaries of the watershed. So one other interesting thing about the river, and you'll notice in that last slide, I said it's about 2,300 miles. The river changes length yearly. In fact, it's getting shorter continually, pretty much shorter every year. We have altered the river quite a bit, so it doesn't move as much as it used to, but the process of erosion and sediment transport in the river is such that we're constantly cutting off bends in the river. So water is trying to take its path to the Gulf of Mexico, the shortest path. And so the length of the river changes constantly. So you'll never find a kind of a consistent length of the river. I find that pretty cool. It's really a living thing. Okay, so back to this. We've talked about size, richness of species. So these are a few facts here. Freshwater mussels, there are about 30 species of freshwater mussels in the Mississippi River. Historically, there were 50, so there are about 20 species of mussels that have gone extinct since we have sort of been keeping track. That's more mussel species than all the rivers in Europe contain. Find that to be pretty fascinating. And some of these numbers, so around 73 species of amphibians and reptiles, about 300 species of birds. One thing I find just incredible is that about 40% of all the waterfowl in North America migrate along the Mississippi River flyway. And that's what this illustration here is on the left. So that's 40% of all the individual ducks and other waterfowl will migrate up and down the Mississippi River. That's, duck hunting. There's a great duck hunting heritage in the Mississippi River, specifically here at this confluence of the Illinois, Mississippi and Missouri rivers. There's quite a duck hunting heritage, and you can see why. There are about 240 or 241 species of fish found in the Mississippi River basin, so that entire watershed. In the Mississippi River itself, here at Alton, and in the few miles, we'll say 20 miles north and south of Alton, scientists have found 150 species of fish, which is incredible. That's a huge diversity of fish. Really pretty astounding, and that number has increased significantly in the last 50 years. Before the Clean Water Act, I'm not even going to venture to guess how many species it was that would be found typically in the Mississippi River, but it was significantly less than 150. And then, there are somewhere around 600 species of plants. I'm seeing a chat here from Bob. I'm going to say your name, and I'm sorry, Bob Steyert. Says Mark Twain has a great quote about river miles getting less and less. Rivers don't try to be shorter. Rivers want to meander. Oh, let's see. Oh, that's not the quote. Sorry about that. Miles fact checker might have to dig up that quote if he's got a second as well. Just give me a shout when you got it. I'm seeing a thumbs up. Thanks, Miles.
Ted, the quote is something or other like, the rivers lose so much mileage, they'll end up being zero.
Nice. That's pretty cool, actually. So if Mark Twain in Life on the Mississippi has some really great anecdotes about that as well. One I just find fascinating, and like I mentioned, we don't see this too much anymore, cutoffs in the river, just because we have constrained the river so much through management. But in his days as a steamboat pilot, and I don't remember what town it was, but he talks pretty extensively about pulling up to the bank of a town in Arkansas, a river town, and offloading cargo, unloading passengers. And he visited that river town as a pilot for several years when he was doing that. In Life on the Mississippi, he went back as an old man on sort of a revisiting of his old days on the river, and it was 50 or so years later, revisited that part of the river, and he asked the pilot of that one of those last steamboats, where is this town? And it turns out the town is now at that time over a mile from the riverbank. The town hadn't moved, but the river did. So pretty fascinating. That book, if anybody is interested, is a really interesting read on the Mississippi River. It's I find it alternatively like very fascinating and very boring. It just depends on the section, but I'd recommend it. If you can get through the boring parts, the river stories are pretty incredible. So the next, preservation of ancient lineages, another thing that makes the river great. So this is, so Mary asked, can you tell us the book again? That's Life on the Mississippi. It's Mark Twain.
And we also have a question from Samantha about whether or not the numbers on the last slide reflect both native and invasive species.
Thank you. I would definitely, for the fish, those include both native and non-native species. I'm less certain about the other ones. Yeah. So preservation of ancient species. This is a fossil from a ancient paddlefish, about 125 million years old. Is this fossil here? And here is a paddlefish just a couple years ago. This is a colleague of ours, Ed, who did some work on paddlefish. And paddlefish are really interesting. They are very much an ancient species. Like I said, we see fossils from 125 million years ago of these paddlefish. And the Mississippi River ended up being very hospitable to them across the years. Its north-south orientation really allowed fish and other species to migrate north and south with the various ice ages and the moving of glaciers up and down, north and south. So paddlefish are really cool. They're a cartilaginous fish, so they don't have bones like many of our other fishes. Let's see if I can get to the next slide. They're pretty neat. This is what they look like. They're filter feeders. They have this crazy proboscis, or I'm not even sure what the technical term for it might be, on their face here, and it is full of these electroreceptors, and so they can sense the movements and I guess you would it's not really nervous system, but firing of muscles in zooplankton or other plankton that they feed on. So they basically can sense plankton in the water and filter feed those. So these are pretty cool. Another ancient lineage of fish would be these bowfin or dogfish. That it looks kind of ugly on this slide here, but if you see one in real life, they can be just absolutely gorgeous. They get, especially in the breeding season, their fins will turn almost a bright blue. If you ever get a chance, and if you're fishing, they'll fight very hard. So they're a really cool fish. They can also breathe air, so they're one of these ancient species that have an air bladder that they can breathe air. A similar ancient species, maybe not similar, but another ancient species that breathes air would be gar, and we have several gar species as well. So another thing that makes rivers great is the biological productivity of the river, and what you see in this slide is really kind of what I was talking about with the the concept of the river being more than just water. You can see in this slide, the river really starts in the uplands. We see all kinds of different habitats down through our main channel of the river. And one thing that's really cool about rivers is, rivers, it's cool and what? A problem, I guess, for us, because we've settled along rivers, is rivers flood. And that's part of the biology of a river. You can see here, so our darkest blue here in this river is our sort of normal water stage, but our light blue here is high river stage. And flooding, despite the problems it causes us as humans, it is a natural part of any river ecosystem, and it does, it allows rivers to thrive, and the species that call those rivers home to thrive. So, excuse me, on this slide here is just a little bit more technical illustration of that flood pulse, as we call it. And all these species have really, many of the species that we see on the river have evolved with that flood pulse. And so as you're looking on this graph here, chart to the left here, this is what we would see as our historic and natural flood pulse. You get a spring rise, a summer low, and then you get a sort of medium height winter stage here. And a few things happen along this river stage, and the flood pulse is just incredibly important. It can move nutrients out onto floodplains to allow for replenishment of nutrients in those floodplain forests. Fish spawn on those during those flood events. Many of the fish species that we see, their spawning behavior really is triggered by rising water. And so they will get out into these newly created habitats during flood and spawn. So like, for instance, after the flood of 1993, we had water on the floodplain for months. And in the next years after, we saw just an explosion of young fish so there had been just so much successful spawning out on those floodplains during that flood that it was amazing the number of young fish that we would see those next few years. Birds too take advantage of the sort of normal flood pulse. What you see here, this photo is an interior least tern. It's a threatened species, and it actually nests on mudflats that you would see naturally in the summer months on the Mississippi River and other big rivers. One of the things I talked about, it's a greatly altered river, and that's one of the reasons we study it. This dotted dashed line here is sort of the way the river functions now. We've sort of moved that flood pulse through river management to try to decrease the flood stage in some ways, or the flood pulse more recently and more likely has become, instead of a fast rise, fast fall, we have used river management to basically spread that flood pulse out over months and months and months. So we see kind of more sustained high waters even throughout the summer, which would historically be a low water point. I won't get into it today, but just the building of levees, locks, dams has really taken away a lot of the places where fish would spawn traditionally on those floodplains, and changed the hydrology of the river as well. We see effects in trees as well as fish and other birds. Despite that, the Mississippi River is a super resilient ecosystem. It's highly productive even today. We get huge catfish. We still have a sustainable commercial fishery on the Mississippi River in this area. Catfish, carp, buffalo, which is a native filter feeding fish as well. They're all great food fish. I really encourage anybody who's interested in local foods to check out, especially in Grafton. There's some great local fish markets that have local wild caught fish. Really encourage folks to check that out. It's great stuff. And it's hard to get more local than that. And you're supporting, in the video at the beginning, one of the speakers actually is a commercial fisherman. So yeah, we get quite a few different species, as I mentioned. Yeah. So human use and the rise of civilizations also make a river great. And I'm still talking here. I'll get through these slides, I swear. So this is a pretty interesting thing from Egypt. In this ancient book, Hunifer's Book of the Dead in 1200 BC, you can really tell their Egyptians' relationship to the rivers. And Hunifer actually is in this glyph here. He's in the white, and he's doing some stuff on his way to the afterlife here. He in this, so what's happening is he's basically confessing to his Egyptian gods that he did not steal, he did not fornicate, he did not work people beyond their limits, he did not take fish from the gods' lakes, and interestingly enough, he did not hinder the waters of the inundation. So that tells you the Egyptians' relationship to the river, that one of the things that you had to confess or swear you did not do in your life was alter flooding, basically. So they had a much different relationship to the river than we do here as modern Americans and humans across the world. But I find this to be just fascinating. More locally here, human use and rise of civilizations. The Mississippian culture at Cahokia Mounds here, just across the river from St. Louis, had a great civilization. If anybody's not been there, I really encourage you to go check out Cahokia Mounds State Historic Site. It's phenomenally interesting. The museum is fabulous as well. The city here relied upon the river. It had a population of 10 to 20,000 and existed from about 700 to 1400 AD. There were many satellite towns kind of associated with Cahokia. And they cultivated all kinds of crops there in the river floodplain and those really fertile soils. Also, interestingly enough, there is a spot, we know of humans in this area at least for the last 10,000 years, or 10,000 years, in Calhoun County near Campsville. There's a site there where we know of human occupation for 10,000 years, and it's one of the places where crop domestication occurred. So there are several places across the globe where crop domestication or plant domestication took place, and this happens to be one of them up in near Campsville. It's what's called the Coster site, and I'm not exactly sure what. I'm seeing another chat here. Just confirming that it's called the Coster site. Thanks, Jan. So I believe plants that they may have domesticated would be like amaranth, which is a native grain. There's evidence, I believe, of fish rearing pens as well. So it's a pretty cool site as well. So more close to home, we still rely on rivers heavily. There are along the Mississippi River, there are about 15 million people who draw their drinking water from the Mississippi River. There are they're in the 60 counties that touch the upper Mississippi River or the border of the Mississippi River. Yearly, over $253 billion of economic activity is generated. What you can see here is this is obviously St. Louis, our confluence of these three great rivers. So one thing I want to point out on this map, it's a little hard to see. I should have just outlined it, but if you go right around here, you can see like a little bit of land use change. It's almost like a line like this. So this is all floodplain. You see Horseshoe Lake here. That's an ancient river channel. This is a bluff. So this is a river bluff. And then you can kind of see it pretty well delineated along here. So the river over the history has sort of meandered back and forth across this floodplain. And this is still floodplain, although, so we call this the American bottom. It's all levee protected, but about 250,000 people live in this floodplain right here. So just moving on a little bit to biggest threats to our rivers. Physical manipulation, as I've talked about, is a huge threat. So levees, locks, dams, invasive species, Asian carp is one that comes to mind pretty quickly, but there are hundreds of others. Nutrient pollution, and this is something that we work on pretty heavily at NGRREC, although we work on all these things, but I work on nutrient pollution quite a bit. Microplastics, so this is a new kind of emerging thing in fresh water. Many people are familiar with microplastics in oceanic systems. Just the idea that plastic is persistent in the environment. But we see them often in rivers too. I'm out on the river a lot. And many times you can get out of a boat on an island where water's washing up, and you will see just like in this photo, though you often see smaller, a line of plastic that is washed up. It's pretty incredibly disgusting and makes me very sad. But you see plastic. So, we've done some work. Miles Corcoran, a colleague, is on the call here. He's done some work with some colleagues at St. Louis U and other institutions with microplastics and filtering some of their water samples down. You can take a cubic foot of water from the Mississippi River, filter it down, and there's going to be plastic in it. Any foot of water, that's about 28 gallons or liters, 28 liters in a cubic foot of water. And there's going to be a piece of plastic in there, whether it's a small fiber from a synthetic sweater or fleece or something like that, or a piece of a water bottle that's broken down. So that's an emerging topic that we just don't know much about. So, next slide. Yeah, NGRREC's work in all this. What are we doing to study these great rivers? We're doing research, education, and conservation. We do a number of experiments and studies. We do general environmental monitoring and data collection. We do quite a bit of land conservation and assistance to landowners in the watershed. Once again, we know what happens in the watershed ultimately affects what happens in the river, especially water quality wise. We do some demonstration projects. We try to inform policy and policymakers by turning data into knowledge to allow those policymakers to make good decisions. And we also lead discussion around those things. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip a few slides here. Actually, I'm going to hit this next slide. We have 5 principal scientists at NGRREC working on various things, and you'll see more about their work in other Neighbor Nights events. So I encourage you to tune in again to those other Neighbor Nights events. You'll probably hear from all these topics for sure. one thing I want to talk about is sort of our working model on of how we go about our research and the other things we do. So, you know, what we're really trying to do at NGRREC, again, our mission is river sustainability. And we try to work hard to, you know, understand what the issues are and where there might be gaps in knowledge. And then we try to identify those gaps, initiate and do research to create knowledge to fill those gaps. And then, you know, with the idea being that, you know, generally our the pathway from research to good policy is a long and winding road. And for a lot of reasons, it's necessary that way, but we think there are a lot of instances where there are research and knowledge gaps that we can fill and quickly, very quickly, provide information to policymakers and managers to create better policy to inform that policy. So that's sort of our working model. And these are ones I'm going to skip. So this is just a quick slide of a project I work on, the Great Lakes to Gulf Observatory. That's sort of an illustration, or really probably our best illustration right now of our data to knowledge to policy or informing policy that we have. And that's looking at the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico and nutrient runoff. So this is sort of our model of how that works. And one thing I will say is, you know, we're informing policy, but we don't advocate for any particular policy. We try hard to just set the stage for policymakers to make good decisions. And that is about it for tonight. And we have 5 minutes left on the schedule, but I am happy to stay for some more time for discussion if we go beyond. And so thanks very much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Happy to take any questions, anything like that. So I'm seeing a few chats here. So will we receive information for future neighbor nights? Yes, absolutely. I encourage you to go to the NGRREC website. Sarah just put it in the chat here. Thanks, Sarah. And you should be able to can you sign up for an email list on the website? Sarah, no.
We don't currently have an email list, but if you go to our website, you can at least register for January and February. But if you shoot me an email, I'll put my email in the chat and I can add you to our list that I've been starting.
All right.
We also post that information on our Facebook, our Twitter, and our Instagram, which you can follow us if you'd like.
All right. So a couple more questions here. Who funds you? We are funded by the state of Illinois. We have a appropriation from the state of Illinois and grant funding. So we're about 50-50. So we are self-supporting here at NGRREC with grant funding. And so, yeah, that appropriation from the states for operating funds and other programs. And then the rest is grant funded. So we are always seeking grants. Does NGRREC have a cultural counterpart, such as Illinois Extension or Prairie Research Institute, something that deals with people and society? So that's a great question. I would say that is something we're always dealing. People in society is something that's always in our mind. To date, we do not have a specific person on staff who is doing what we would call a human dimension work. We have done some of that, but we that is very high on our list of priorities. And in fact, we have been working hard for the last few years to get someone on staff who does some of that human dimension work, because we know, we do know that that is a huge part of the river ecosystem, people and how people behave and interact with the river. We do, we have many partners. Prairie Research Institute and Illinois Extension are both great partners for us. We work extensively with them. And, we cannot, we're a small organization. We don't have staff that touch every subject, but we work very hard to collaborate with staff and other organizations across many disciplines. So if we don't have someone, and this is a perfect example, we don't have someone on staff doing those kind of human dimension work, but collaborating with those other organizations really allows us to have a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts. So thanks for that question. Top 3 projects for 2021. Ooh, good question. That is going to depend on who you ask, I think. I work on the Great Lakes to Gulf project, which is our decision support and data visualization tool for nutrients in the Mississippi River watershed. So that's a great project. I'm really excited to be working on. I'll probably give sometime soon another Neighbor Nights presentation on the Great Lakes to Gulf project. It's definitely a presentation all unto itself. But that would be one, and I'm probably biased because I work on that one, that makes that a top project. Let's see, what are some other projects? Help me out, people.
You mentioned microplastics, right?
Yes.
Definitely an area that NGRREC is going to be reaching forward to. So it's going to be kind of an area where we're trying to integrate across many different fields, because it is such a far-reaching problem. As Ted mentioned before, you take, I think you said what, a cubic foot of water from the Mississippi River, which is 7 gallons or so, and you're going to find hundreds of pieces of plastic, if not thousands, but they're just so microscopic that it's hard to see. So that's definitely an area that we're moving towards.
Yes, thanks, Miles. Okay, here's a good question. We got three in a row. I'll hit pretty quick. Principia College has an excellent collection of Mississippi River art. That is true. They have a great collection of Mississippi River art. I think, thank you for bringing that up. That's great. And that's definitely part of river culture that we find interesting. I think I saw Dean Klinkenberg, the Mississippi River Traveler, on the call today. He's collaborated with us recently, or it's been a while, I guess, on Mississippi River music program. That was pretty cool. So look up Mississippi River Traveler. Do we still have the mobile buoys deployed? Yes. And what you're seeing in this slide here, if my screen is still shared, is my colleague Miles, who's just speaking. Thanks, Miles, working on one of our mobile buoys. We have 7 of those out. Most of them are just in for the winter now. We have one still stationed in Lake Decatur that will stay out all winter, and that one's not really a buoy, but what you see in this top picture is us installing a fixed station. So that one can stay out all winter long because we don't have to worry so much about ice. So Miles is the brains and brawn behind that program at this point. So that's been a really cool, a great project. And again, a entire neighbor nights has been dedicated and certainly will be dedicated to that program again. We get a lot of great data from those buoys, taking water quality measurements of many types. Okay, another question here. In general, can you comment on how wildlife, including fish and birds, are doing? Would you say it's stable, declining, or improving? Great question. Great question. I'm not sure. I would say in general, it's a really mixed bag. Fish and birds. So fish, I think, are doing, I will say unequivocally, fish are doing better now than they were 50 years ago. Without a doubt, after the Clean Water Act, water pollution, just the difference is incredible. And that kind of goes with the number of species I mentioned has increased significantly. So, in general, the health of the river itself is I'm optimistic about it. I eat fish from the river. I swim in the river. I do all kinds of recreation on the river. The river is muddy, dirty, yes. Is it unhealthy or unsafe? I would say generally no. It gets a bad rep because it is muddy. It's naturally muddy. I think it's intimidating for a lot of reasons. But I would really encourage folks to get out and interact with it as much as possible. Birds are in peril across the continent, across the world. I would say National Audubon Society or Cornell Lab of Ornithology are two really good resources to learn more in depth about that. We've lost many birds for years, billions of birds over the last 50 years we've lost, in numbers at least. A bright spot for sure are waterfowl. So we see increasing numbers of waterfowl and stabilization of waterfowl populations. And that can very much be attributed to habitat management and a really concerted effort of people interested in birds and sportsmen and non-governmental and governmental organizations to focus on waterfowl habitat. So we're seeing increasing numbers of waterfowl. So that is absolutely a bright spot. Like I said, the river generally is pretty healthy. We have problems though, and we have problems and threats. Invasive species are a huge threat. Plastics are a huge threat. Nutrients are a huge threat. So it's a real mixed bag. I'm optimistic for a lot of reasons. Climate change certainly is a big threat, and compounded with our what I would call unsustainable river management.
So we missed a question, Ted, from Samantha.
Okay.
And she asked, what is the rate of change for the river shrinkage? And then how are paddlefish important to the river?
Thanks. So what is the rate of change? I don't have any good information on that. I think it's quite variable how quickly the length of the river changes. for instance, we had a cutoff happen not very long ago, where, so with a big bow, like a big bow in the river got cut off. That was not on the Mississippi, that was on the Wabash River, maybe 10 years ago, something like that. So that would cut off like, tens of miles at once, like in one month, maybe. I don't remember exactly how quickly that happened, but it was fast. So I think the rate of change is very variable. And
Why are paddlefish important?
Thanks.
in Mississippi?
Thanks. Yeah, so they're just one part of the overall ecosystem, I would say, maybe no more or less important than any other species. But I find them just to be very cool because they're very cool, first of all, but they're important because they can be an indicator of health of the river for a few reasons. They, like I said, they're filter feeders. So they feed on aquatic phytoplankton and zooplankton, so small plants and small animals. That is the same food source for many of our other fishes, especially young fish in the river. And so if we're seeing problems in paddlefish, maybe not being able to get food, then a lot of our, what we would, kind of call more important fish like sport fishes, may be having issues as well. Paddlefish are rather important because they have the exact same food source as our invasive carp, Asian carp. So they're certainly seeing a lot of pressure from invasive carp. I also find paddlefish really cool because they are a source of caviar. American caviar is actually very highly regarded, and that comes from paddlefish and sturgeon. That industry is less than it has been in the past because it's been overexploited especially in paddle or in sturgeon. In fact, it's so highly regarded that not many years ago, within the last 10 years, and I'm sure there are others, there was a paddlefish smuggling and poaching ring that was busted. And this was close by, within 100 miles of here, of NGRREC. 100 people got caught up in this paddlefish caviar smuggling ring. And that's not the first, and certainly won't be the last time for that. It's pretty unfortunate, but just a super cool fish. All right, I'm scrolling down here. Yeah, thanks, Miles. So what's the most interesting data collected from the buoys? Good question. I'm gonna give that to Miles. Miles, do you mind answering that?
Oh, that's fine. Actually, I mentioned in the chat that personally, I find the nitrate values the most interesting because you can really see the direct effect of nitrate on the hypoxic zone in the Gulf of Mexico, and it's also to me, it's really very interesting to see the concentrations change with seasonality. Especially due to agriculture, or if there are urban areas nearby, you can see kind of spikes in the watershed pretty easily with some of our continuous monitoring data. And then flood pulses come through, and they kind of wipe everything clear. So I guess, another interesting thing to see in the buoy data is just how one of our scientists likes to say, how the solution to pollution is dilution, right? When there's a huge flooding event, we just get a bunch of water, and so you see concentrations of nitrate fall. You also see, you know, conductivity, which is a measure, kind of like a proxy of pollution levels, or so ions in the water, that decreases drastically. So it's kind of neat to see, you know, on a continuous basis, what the effects of those flooding events look like.
Thanks, Miles. A couple of, one last, so I see Steve Jacobson says, saw recently a federal proposal for a bill in 2021 for a Mississippi River Restoration Resilience Initiative. Hope it passes. I do too. We've, I think that's being put forth by the Upper Mississippi River Basin Association, an important partner of ours. And I'm excited. I'm glad to see that. And I hope, yeah, I hope it gets traction. I think it will. Conservation, as we've seen, even in sort of these partisan times, conservation seems to be bringing people together. And I'm hopeful that that continues.
We already also had a question about whether or not we study fish flesh and if we have
Thanks.
any problems with that.
So no, that is not something we study. So that's mostly, I'll just say no, we don't study that. State agencies do a lot of that work, and then other academic folks do that work. It's just something we have not gotten into. Thanks for the question. So
I think we answered all the questions. Is there anyone else that has anything else they would like to ask right now?
Sorry, I might have missed it. Did we address the is microplastics part of the study question?
Miles just sent the
I actually just went ahead and wrote an answer to that, but no, we don't measure microplastics using those buoys. So the sensors we have deployed in those are more biological parameters, as well as physical parameters that are kind of more traditional in terms of water quality monitoring, things that you know, the larger organizations, states, and you know, USGS, those kinds of places have looked at in kind of long-term data sets, so that we can compare our data to theirs, and kind of provide a more ecological snapshot is what I said.
All right, I think I'm gonna, let's see, what time is it? Probably make this our last question. Who's responsible for the museum exhibition? And so if we're talking about the National Great Rivers Museum, that's the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They are our neighbor, our landlord. Not, I would say, landlord's not the right thing. We lease our land from them that our building is on. But yeah, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers at the Lock and Dam. They're a great partner. We work with them, extensively, but we don't have a part in the museum, though it is a fabulous museum, and I'd highly recommend it, especially for if you're interested in the navigation aspect of the river. It's a great. So thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. Really, this is fun. I love these neighbor nights. I love them more when they're in person, so I can't wait to see everybody in person next time we do that. I hope we still do the Zoom, though, because I think it's greatly inclusive. Happy to do it. Thanks for all the questions. Maybe we can all get together and have a beer after our next neighbor nights in person to celebrate that. So, or whatever your beverage of choice is. So I don't know if Jen or Sarah has anything to wrap up, but thanks again, everybody. It's really my pleasure to speak with you all tonight.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, if anything comes up, I'm gonna put my email in the chat one more time. So feel free to email me questions that come up in the middle of the night. If you're still pondering what you learned, just feel free to shoot me an email, and then visit our website. Thank you, Sarah, to stay up to date on our neighbor nights in the future.
All right.
So much, Ted, and thank you, Jen, for putting this together. And I was really happy to see everyone tonight, and shout out to all the NGRREC staff and faculty that came as well as Lewis and Clark staff, because it's really nice to feel like we're sharing this with other members of our staff.
Thanks, everybody.
Everyone.
Bye, everyone.